Here's a question for you. What do you get when you mix sci-fi, action, revenge, and a little horror? If your answer was a really great movie, then against all odds you'd actually be correct. Upgrade is exactly that, a movie that incorporates loads of different genres into its story and manages to pull it off really well. But despite that, this movie wasn't very popular at all, only making around $17 million at the box office worldwide. That's mainly because it released right when people were starting to get really hyped for Venom, and this movie did look like a bit of a low-budget ripoff. I think that's a real shame because this movie outclassed Venom in so many ways, and it deserves a lot more recognition than it gets, and I'm gonna explain why in a moment. Before I do that though, I think I should quickly breeze through the stuff that I wasn't too crazy about. Firstly, the main character, Grey Trace, doesn't really grow or change in any way throughout the film. The writers do a good job of making him sympathetic and likable, but he doesn't really develop in any meaningful way. This isn't actually a bad thing because the writers did something really interesting that I'll talk about later. But if you're expecting a really complex character, then you're gonna be a bit disappointed. Also, the plot isn't very original, and it's definitely gonna be very familiar. After criminals paralyze Grey and kill his wife, he decides to get a chip called STEM implanted into his body to help him walk again, and avenge his wife. But that's not all. STEM turns out to be an AI that can make Grey practically unstoppable as well, and he helps Grey on his quest. You've seen elements of this plot in loads of other places. The Punisher, Robocop, and Venom come to mind for me. Unfortunately, that does make the movie a little predictable at some points, which takes a bit of the fun out of it. One final thing I have to say is that they introduced this hacker character who helps Grey for like one thing, then says something along the lines of "we can't let them win," and then she disappears, but we never find out what she's talking about, and it doesn't seem to have any relevance to the rest of the film, so it was just really unnecessary. That's pretty much all I didn't like about this movie though, and the good things definitely make up for the bad things. First of all, the action was really good. It was staged well, shot well, and it was always really tense, which is the number one thing an action scene has to get right. I also liked that the action scenes were quite varied. I've seen some movies where all the action scenes were just fights, and it got boring really quickly. In this movie there's some fights, some on-foot chases, and even a car chase, so the action was always exciting. I also liked that the final fight wasn't really focused on the physical fighting, but rather on who was stronger mentally and who would crack first. Also, there was some really interesting camera work in the movie as well. Sturm controls Gray's body from time to time, and when he does, the camera moves in this way that makes it look like a machine's controlling it. It's actually kind of unsettling and draws a really stark contrast between Gray and Stem, because when Gray's in control, the camera moves normally like a human's controlling it. I also really like the pacing of this film. Normally it's something I don't pay attention to unless it's really bad or really good, and in this movie I think the pacing is perfect. There wasn't a single moment where I was bored, and it still manages to have a sense of natural progression, which is really difficult to pull off. One thing that I was surprised by is that there were some really funny moments in this movie. Gray's reactions to all the crazy things Stem gets his body to do is honestly so hilarious, and I wouldn't have minded a whole movie of just Stem controlling Gray's body and seeing Gray being completely baffled by what he's doing. Remember how I said that Gray doesn't really change in any way throughout the film? Well, that's actually because the writers did something really clever. Instead of having Gray's character change, Stem is actually the one who changes. By the end of the movie, Stem is pretty much a completely different character, and you see him in a completely different light, which was really cool to see unfold. Finally, the ending of this movie is full of so many twists and turns. It has an initial twist that I thought was really predictable, but then it has this really unexpected twist that makes so much sense when it's fully explained. Then it has another twist that makes you wonder what's been going on throughout the whole movie, and then the movie finally ends with a twist that makes you look at everything that's happened in a whole new way, and also leaves you feeling kind of conflicted. This also makes for a really rewatchable film, because when you watch it and know what happens, you can see how everything was planned out, and there wasn't just a twist for shock value. So, if you've managed to make it to this point, then you know what I think of this movie. It's really good. It has everything I and lots of other people want in a film. A great story, great action, and some interesting ideas. Although it does leave a few plot threads unresolved, and the plot isn't the most original, I think the movie does put an interesting spin on tried and true concepts, and the good things about it outweigh the bad by a lot. All of this results in Upgrade being a hidden gem, and if you haven't seen it, I can't recommend it enough, because I think it's the best movie you probably haven't seen.